Good evening, everyone. This is Dolores Cannon with the Metaphysical Hour. We were a little late because there was electronic problems again. We always have little gremlins that are on the line that like to play with our electronics and technology. But we're going live now. And this is June the 22nd, 2012. So you know we're still doing live call performances for another couple of weeks, and then we're going to be going into the archives again. We are still, for the next few weeks, we're interviewing our speakers and the authors that are going to be at our conference. We're having the 7th Transformation Conference in Rogers, Arkansas, July the 13th to the 15th. And we're really getting excited about it because it is really getting close. It'll be here before we know it. So we've been interviewing on our show a lot of the ones that are going to be speakers. So we're going to have another one tonight. He's a keynote speaker at the conference. His name is Wayne Peterson, and he has a lot of very interesting information to share, too. So, Wayne, are you there?
I hope I'm here.
Okay, now we can hear you good.
Okay, thank you.
We never know. You're fading in and out of dimensions, I guess. Now, we got you back into our dimension. Let's stay there for a while.
Okay.
Before we start, I want to give out the toll-free number in case anyone does want to call in and ask questions tonight. And it's 1-888-627-6008. 888-627-6008. That number is good all over the world. And if you have questions, I would like you to focus on our guest. And we're going to wait about a half hour to let him give his story and everything before we start taking calls. But if you're interested, some people just like to listen. That's perfectly all right, too. But, okay, Wayne. And you're going to be a keynote at the conference, but I want you to tell people about yourself. I always start with having the guests give everybody their background and how you got into metaphysics and all of this field. Talk about your background first.
Well, I suppose I can start with simply saying that when I was about to finish my college work, I ran into a man who was recruiting for the Peace Corps, and they were setting up a little exhibit about a week before my graduation. And he simply said to me, "Are you about to graduate?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I really don't know." And at that point he said, "I think the Peace Corps would be perfect for you." I didn't realize I was talking to David Rockefeller, and when I asked what his name was, he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm David Rockefeller." And I said, "Well, that's strange because there's a David Rockefeller, New York, president of the, Chase Manhattan Bank." And he said, "Oh, I'm the guy." But he did convince me that going to Brazil with the Peace Corps, because I told him, well, one of the reasons I didn't like the Peace Corps policy of you had to go where they sent you. And I wanted to go to Brazil. And he said, "Well, do you speak the language?" I said, "Yes, fluently." And he said, "Well, then what's the problem?" I said, "Well, I don't want to be out in the jungle." And he said, "I can arrange that." So every request I had, he said, "I can arrange it." So that's why I asked him, "Well, who are you that you can arrange all these things?" But I did have a wonderful program in Brazil, and it did get the attention of the American ambassador in Brazil, who invited me in one day and said, "What are you going to do after the Peace Corps?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure." And he said, "Well, I have a job for you. I want you to come back and work at the embassy here with us." So that's how I got into the diplomatic service. And I did that for a number of years in Asia, Africa, obviously, and Brazil. And so you're sort of wondering, well, where does my sort of spiritual background come into this? Well, I started late. And it wasn't until I was back in Washington at a job in Washington that I began to have a few little expansions of consciousness. There were some strange things happening in my life. And that's when I heard about a book that Mr. Benjamin Creme wrote about the Reappearance of the Christ. This is based on Alice Bailey's book, very much the same title. And when I read the book, I realized that he was going to be in Washington, D.C. on a lecture tour. And I went to that, and of course, the very first time I met him, I also ended up sitting next to a strange man I met at this program. And after a while, I realized that this was the one that Benjamin Creme calls the reappeared Christ, or we just call him Maitreya. The Buddhist would call him Maitreya Buddha, of course, because that's the name they would understand him by. But it was the beginning of a whole new approach to viewing, I would say, a totally different aspect of the way our world functions. And being in the government, I began to try to find out how many people in the world, because I did travel extensively around the world and would meet with heads of state and other important people. And I learned that they all knew about this guy named Maitreya. Naturally, I couldn't do any public speaking on it because I was a government employee. And at my level, of course, the State Department would have demanded a big outline of what I was going to speak on, and I don't believe that they would have approved of me talking about the reappeared Christ. And that went on until the White House. Someone at the White House called me one day and said, "Mr. Peterson, we know you have a connection with Maitreya, and we'd like to talk to you." And I said, "Who are you?" And they said, "Well, it doesn't matter. We'd just like to talk with you." So I said, "Fine," set up an appointment. And they wanted me to tell officials at the Vatican about what I knew. And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, we're curious, but we don't want anyone in the Vatican to know that we're curious about this story as well." So I was sort of being used as a pawn, and that was a lot of years ago. So I can be a little more open about it now because it was a long time ago, and there's more people in the world who know now that we're going through a very different time. But I was intrigued that there were so many high officials that were interested. It was about the same time that I think many people know about the visionaries in Medjugorje, where the Catholic Church very much promotes, because a group of children who are now adults, of course, were having conversations with one of the spiritual beings that they just recognized as Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus.
So all of this started that long ago?
Oh, long ago, yes. And
I thought Maitreya was only like 20, 30 years, but that's a lot longer.
Well,
a lot further back.
He came in 1977, so that's quite a while back.
Okay.
But that's when I got a call and said, well, some of the visionaries from Medjugorje are coming to Washington, and there's a meeting, and we'd like you to be there. And I said, well, I don't know if I want to bother. And they said, well, it's a very select audience. And when they started telling me who was there, essentially it was the president's cabinet ministers. So we had the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of this and that. And I said, I can't believe these people would be interested. Well, they were. And so I think the point I'm making here is really this is not a secret among political and economic and even scientific leaders, but it seems to be very much a story that the general public does not hear about unless you're part of the New Age community. The one person that does speak out about this quite forcefully, of course, is Mikhail Gorbachev of Russia, who I met a few years ago. And he goes around giving talks on precisely this, that governments need to readjust for the coming shift that's taking place, and they need to come forward now and tell the general public in the world what is going on, rather than trying to hide it because they don't know particularly how they're going to present this. So essentially that's what I've been doing in the last year since I retired, and came here to Henderson, Nevada, and wrote a book about my sort of contacts with Maitreya, plus a lot of the other spiritual beings that Alice Bailey or Helena Blavatsky would simply call the masters of the hierarchy or masters of wisdom. There's many names that can be used, and we often get caught up on names which aren't really important at all. It's about what is happening and how we are going to deal with this new world that we're trying to deal with. So that's pretty much it, Dolores.
Okay. But, I don't want to doubt you, but I just want to say the things that I've heard about Maitreya, because, my work goes back into the 70s and 80s. They kept saying that no one had ever seen him, that even Benjamin Crumb had never seen him. And there was only one photograph that exists. So that's what the most startling thing you said was that you have actually seen him.
Yeah, not only seen him, but he pops up quite often. I would believe that tens of thousands of people have seen him. Maybe not Benjamin Crumb, because that's maybe the way his work goes. But when he appeared in Nairobi, Kenya, back in 1988, they did get a few photos of him.
Yeah, that's the problem I heard.
Yeah, that was on CNN quite a bit at that time. It was on the front page of the Times of London at that time. And many newspapers in the world had that because he appeared before about 6,000 people. And he did it by materializing a body out of thin air, which certainly shocked them. And he disappeared at the end of that 20-minute program or so in the same manner. He just dissolved back into air. So it was almost, I would think, traumatic for the people who watched this in person and saw it, but it was just fortunate that there were some reporters there, not for him, but for the woman who had attracted all these people, who was a very popular healer. So he's been doing this before audiences, and very often, I know especially in Europe when I gave lectures, he would appear and he'd be talking to people in the back of the room. And I suspect they had no idea who he was.
That's what I was wondering. You said you suspect thousands of people all over the world have seen him, but you think they probably didn't really realize who he was?
No, and that's a little tricky, plays that he really wants people to recognize the Christ consciousness in every human being. And many people have, I think, a certain image in their mind that they would think he would look like, and he doesn't. If he doesn't fit that image, well, then they simply reject it. But what happens usually, and many people have told me this very same story, is that after seeing him, they think nothing of it, and then for days they have dreams about this, and they can't get him out of their mind. And the reason is that he keeps feeding them this image so that they will begin to realize they have actually seen him. But there are others now, too, that are about to come forward very much in the same vein, I think, that Maitreya has, and then it will get a little more complex.
Mm-hmm. But do you think the Maitreya appears differently to different people?
He can do that. Yes, he has such an expanded consciousness. I would guess he can appear simultaneously in 1,000 different places. But he does have one core body and one core image. so it is, if he appears in that core image, then you can touch him, and he feels very real. But I noticed that if he's not in that core body, it's sort of an apparition on the etheric plane, and then he can't be touched. He says, can't be touched now. Well, that's because there's really nothing there. And when he does that, he can change his image. And I know I've given talks a few times, and then people who are leaving, one woman, for example, after I gave a talk, got in the elevator, and there he was. And she said, you sort of look like Maitreya that Mr. Peterson was just talking about. And as she stood and looked at him, his image changed 5 times along with his clothes, just to show this ability he has to change this image. And she said all the while he did it, he was singing a song. So we never quite know what his purpose is. And, of course, the people who see it say, well, why did he do this? Well, I don't know why he does it. I think it's just creating expectation that things are going to change, and we should get used to the fact that the human kingdom and this 5th kingdom, from which Maitreya is part of, the veil is thinning between these two. And that also goes for the Deva kingdom. And that veil is thinning, and we are soon going to have many, many people being able to see through this thin veil and see the Devas, see the masters, and that goes for extraterrestrials as well, who usually reside in very etheric bodies. This is going to give us a sense of universal brotherhood when we can see these things. And that will be a very big change in the way I think we live and relate to one another, that we're not just a few accidents of history, that we are a human race, but we don't know if there's anything else that exists. We're soon going to be able to not only see, but communicate with all these other kingdoms that we hear about. I would think most of the majority of the people in this country believe there are angels, but how many have actually seen them? Mm-hmm. Some people claim to, but I think when more than half the population can see them and communicate, that's going to change everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, in my work, I'm always finding people who can communicate with the fairies and the gnomes and, the elves and everything. They do communicate with the nature spirits. They said they see them, but
that's in the session, correct?
No, they said many of them have this ability because they're out in nature a lot. They're close to nature.
Yes.
And I know other people say they see angels, but sometimes they doubt it afterwards. But we do agree with you that the veil is thinning, because there's many things happening now. It's to get us used to this, that things are definitely changing.
Yeah, we don't want to... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I can't wait. I keep asking to see them. And, Wayne, I wasn't introduced. I'm Julia. I'm Dolores' daughter. We do the show together. So
yeah, and
she's in there.
She's the one that runs the company, too. So she likes to help me with this and talk to the guests also.
Well, we're pleased to have you with us.
Well, thank you. We're glad to have you, too.
Okay.
But that's one of the things, I can't wait for these things, because I'm always asking, I want to see the E.T. brothers, and I want to see the Divas, and I want to see, all these things. And it's like, I know it's so close, and I can almost feel it, but it's like, where are you?
Yes. Well, that is, it's fascinating to me, because sometimes when I give a talk, I will see one or another of several masters that do appear at times, and then after I will check with the audience and say, how many actually saw someone else up here with me? And there'll always be 3 or 4 people out of 100 that will say yes, and they will describe them perfectly. And the others will say, we didn't see a thing. And so it's curious to me how some can see this very clearly and others can't see anything.
Yeah, that happens a lot in my lectures and my classes that I'm giving. In the beginning, people would come up and they'll say, "You're going to think I'm crazy, but now it happens about every time I give a lecture or a class, and somebody will come up later and they said, I saw a being standing next to you, or sometimes they see several around me, and sometimes they just see them as lights, but other times they'll be definite forms. So I know people are, but then the rest of the people didn't see anything.
Right. Well, I think some people, you get your information in different ways, and I would love to be able to see. I mean, I'll see different things, but some people hear, some people feel, some people see. And I would love to be one of those that sees, but I'm not. Right? I'm not yet.
Not yet. Okay. But you can hear.
I can hear, and I can see. I'll see visuals, but I won't necessarily see like what you're saying there, a being, saying this. I'm hoping when you're here, because I heard through the grapevine that we might have a visit, and so I'm really hoping that I can see it.
Well, who knows? Maybe they're following you around.
Well, it's interesting because I have some friends who can see very clearly on their own very often when these things happen, and yet at other times I will be standing right next to Maitreya having a conversation, and then he disappears, and they're only 6 feet away, and they say, I didn't see anything. I said, yes, but a half an hour ago you did see him. What's the difference? Why could you not see it could see it a half hour ago, and now it's only 30 minutes later, and he's 6 feet away from you, and you couldn't see it? So I think part of that is also controlled by those who appear. There has to be something like that.
Say that.
But, I did one talk, and afterwards this man came up and he said, who was that man that came on stage and stood in back of you for about 5 minutes and then walked off? And he said he'd asked the ones around him. He said, nobody saw anything. And I said, well, I didn't know there was anybody there. So this was a physical person that someone saw.
But Dolores, can you at times feel the energy from them if they appear?
Well, I know when I'm lecturing, they're always with me, but I call them my guides and guardians that help me with the lectures and the classes. But I don't know if it's the same thing or not. But this was actually a physical person that someone saw. I think they appear in many different ways. We just don't really recognize it.
Yes, that's true.
But people do feel energy in the room, and I feel energized because that's what keeps me up there lecturing. So I don't know if it's the same thing that you're talking about, but maybe everybody has different names for them.
Yes, and I remember doing a lecture some years ago in Seattle, Washington. It was at the Paramahansa Yogananda Center, and I thought, well, this has to have good energy. And as people came in, they kept saying, there's a man outside standing by the door who's shaking hands with everybody and inviting them in. Who is that? And I said, I don't know. I'm new here. They all thought it was Maitreya, but I purposely did not go out and look because I didn't want to be in the position of saying, yes, it is, no, it isn't, because individuals are supposed to make up their own minds about this. So he didn't come in, but after it was over, I went across the street to their bookstore to sign books for people, and people coming in and say, oh, the guy we think is Maitreya is now in the front of the bookstore. Come and talk to him. I said, no, not until I finish signing books for people here. Then I'll go up. Well, by the time I was finished, I said, where is he? They said, well, now he left the store. He's out in the middle of the street. Well, we're in downtown Seattle, and there's right at a crossroads. And, it's about 6 lanes of traffic in both directions. And there's a guy in white standing in the middle there, in the middle of the night, And it was dark, and of course Seattle's always a little wet. There's a mist coming down. And all these people are huddled around the awning of the bookstore watching him, but no one will go out there. And they said, oh, everybody's afraid to go out there. So I said, well, I have to go out there and just see if it is Maitreya or just some crazy guy standing in the middle of the street. But there was no traffic. Suddenly, at this not very late, like 8:30 in the evening, there wasn't a car in sight. So I went out there, and the closer I got, the more I realized, yes, this really is Maitreya. Now, what is he doing out here? So I said, is everything all right? And he said, oh, it's wonderful. And he started talking about, I know how the world looks like it's going to hell in a handbasket, but it's really not. Everything's going according to plan. Don't worry. And at that point, he looks up into the sky, and he throws his hands up, and he's speaking a language I have no idea what it is. And I can usually distinguish foreign languages even if I can't speak them, because if you travel enough, you get the sort of rhythm. But this one, I had no idea. So I said, well, they're calling me because the car is here to take me to the hotel. And I said good night. And I realized that when I stepped into the car and they closed the door, it was Maitreya closing the door of the car. And yet these people standing by would not talk to him. So the next day, I was speaking at a church at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and the minister said, well, I've told the congregation about your program, but he said, I really don't think there's going to be many people. Then he came back and said, well, there's standing room only. There just isn't room for everyone. And I said, well, what's happening? He said, well, all these people heard about last night when Maitreya appeared, and they saw him, and they're hoping, I guess, they'll see this again. Well, of course, he did not show up. But what was interesting, at the end of my program, I said, how many saw Maitreya last night? And there were quite a few of them, and they had all brought their friends with them today. And I said, well, wasn't that the craziest baseball cap you ever saw on his head? Because it was white. He always wears a white hat. But this was a gigantic baseball cap. With this huge brim out in front. And I'm thinking, where would you buy something like that? And this lady in front was shaking her head, and I said, were you there? And she said, it wasn't a baseball cap. He had a huge white crown on his head. And then the guy in back said, no, it wasn't. It was like a giant white baker's hat. And another guy said, no, it wasn't. It was a huge French beret in white. Everybody saw a different hat on his head. So I guess that was his way of saying, you all see me differently.
Uh-huh. They probably saw his whole appearance differently.
They probably did.
Uh-huh.
They probably did.
But so that goes, that myth that I've been hearing all along. Everybody always said nobody has ever seen him, and there was only the one picture. So you have dissolved that because that's what everybody said. Mm-hmm. Nobody had ever really seen him. He was just like a myth that you've heard of. So now we know different.
But that's simply not true. I've literally spoken to prime ministers in foreign countries who told me he occasionally comes in to the cabinet meetings he has with his heads. So this Maitreya fellow, whoever he is getting around. And I know that when I was in Europe, one of the Oriental ambassadors to Vienna, Austria, talked to me after, and he said, oh, I'm so glad you talked about this. He said, you know, the head of our government, and then he started naming other governments in the Orient, and said they all have met Maitreya. Maitreya comes and talks to us, blah, blah, blah. But he said, we really don't know how to tell this to the people. And he said, now you've done it. He said, you're a very brave soul to stand up and say these things. And I said, well, not really. I mean, people can think I'm crazy, but I know that a lot of people have seen him. There are people, we've had several of our past presidents who have met him. And this happens all over the world. And people say, well, why is he focused on these political leaders? And that is a job that he has undertaken, because the other masters who work with him said, I don't want to work with politicians. Nobody wanted to do it. So Maitreya said, well, I'll do it. And because I am somewhat close to him, I know that eventually I'm going to have to do a little more in that field as well. So, but there are other masters who will work with other sectors of society, some with the scientists, some with the economists, some with the religious groups, so forth and so on. So they've sort of broken this up. And what is our job, we humans on this planet, in 2013, I think, is the year when we humans began to get assignments and saying, you will be working with this particular master or this particular extraterrestrial. You will be the guy on the ground in the dense physical, and you will have meetings with your master, and they will discuss with you how best to approach dealing with the shift that will be coming and how to do it with the least amount of pain and suffering. And so we're all going to be, to some extent, very much involved. And I think we should begin to understand that this is part of our work.
Mm-hmm. Well, in my work, though, I've been telling everyone that we're already in the middle of the shift. You know, it's been happening, I think, since 2003, and it's been getting gradually stronger, and we are in the middle of it. And it's a gradual thing.
I agree with you entirely. It's been going on for some time. It's just that we have reached sort of, let's say, a middle point, and now things get a little more serious. We've had time to ponder these things. We've had a lot of suggestions being given to us. There's been a lot of talk. You have been talking about this, and it's time for people to realize that this is not some illusion, this is not a game, that it's very real.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think. You see, it has been happening for quite a while. From my point of view, it's been happening since 1977. But, back then, no one would believe anything about this. That's changed tremendously, I believe. And I think you can see it by your audiences that you had, that people are everybody's beginning to talk about the shift. The ions people, there's a lot of groups out there who take this very seriously. And now we're going to really get into the part of rebuilding civilization. And that's something I want to talk about at this conference, like how do we in the human kingdom build a new civilization for this new world we're going into?
But that's what we keep telling them. It's like a separation. You may see it differently, a separation of the new earth and the old earth, and that there won't be any negativity or anything in the new earth. So some of the things, the questions people ask me are a little hard to explain about this. I see it as the separation. That was what we were told, as the one goes into another dimension by changing its vibration and frequency. And
I agree with you entirely.
The ones who are going to go, they have to change their frequency and vibration also. But then the ones that are into the negativity and have no desire to change will stay with what they have created in the old earth. Is that the way you see it?
I think we agree.
Okay. Because I still have a lot of questions people ask me that I can't really explain.
So when you talk about this rebuilding and everything, is that just within this new frequency? It's just because all the old things are falling away, so that it's being very conscious of what we are creating and what we're building? Is that what you mean? Or?
Well, you can go all the way back to Helena Blavatsky And the book she wrote, The Secret Doctrine, back in 1888, I believe. Well, that's quite a long time ago. And she said there is, in our soon-coming future, a time when all the past will disappear, and humanity will have to learn how to function in a new world that the past will be of no help in creating a new society. And that's exactly what it is about. Really, when we transition, there's nothing in this old world that will be useful to us to use as a guideline for building the new world. Some people have, some people have called it the wilderness experience because it is very much like, the wagon train going west in the 1850s. You had to depend on each other. You had to build this camaraderie of brotherhood, or you would perish. But you couldn't. It didn't matter what was back east. You had to build a new life out in the prairie with very little to go by except your own skills. So we're going into this new world, and everything has to be left behind. That's going to be rather traumatic. And like you said, Dolores, some people just won't want to do this, and they'll have to stay behind.
Well, I was told eventually they'll all get there anyway, but it's just that now, because there will be a separation.
Oh, that makes sense. There's always, in your lectures, you're always trailblazers, way showers, all that.
Pioneers.
The pioneers. Oh, my, that's what this first,
It may finally, little light went on in your head.
Well, I mean, you're always saying that's what, you have all these waves and all these things, but this whole shift, the ones that are going in this first and this whole thing, those are the way showers for the other ones that will eventually get there once it's all, because that's a great challenge, and that can be very scary to go, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm going to do something.
Yeah. That's right.
It's always the way when the ones step out, they always have difficulty.
Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of...
And they feel alone, too, because nobody understands.
But we'll have the ability to see the fifth kingdom, which will make a big difference. And when you do this building, also to be able to, at will, see the angels, the Deva kingdom, they are the builders. But they will only build what they're told to build. And we, humanity, are at that point where our advanced mental abilities are now getting strong enough that we can visualize what we need, and it will be built by the Devas. Back in old Atlantis, when they had this connection with the Devas, humans abused that relationship. And they were greedy, and they forced the Devas to build things against their will for personal gain. And that's what we call black magic. We don't want to do that black magic again. We want to build with the Devas in a positive way, something that helps everyone in society. That's the difference between now and old Atlantis. And because we abused the Devas so badly in Atlantis, we have been cut off from them for a very long time. So now is our new opportunity to reunite and work together again.
Well, that's what I've been doing lectures and seminars on, too, is creating your own reality, realizing you do have the power to create anything you want. And that's what you were saying. We're beginning to get these abilities back and understand we do have the power to create the world that we want to be in.
Well, like you said, stronger and stronger, and you can see that. The manifesting time is faster than it used to be. It could have taken, it could have taken a whole life to manifest something, where now it's very quick. It can be within moments sometimes.
That's what we've learned, that all you have to do is think it, and it'll become true. Where before you had a little time in there. Do you really want to do this before you were allowed to do it? But now, just give to think it, and it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that's a fascinating topic. But we have to learn to be very prudent about what we do, and we have to morally know what is going to be useful and not harmful. And having that discernment is very important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That's why you always tell people, be careful what you ask for, because you might get it.
Yes.
And once you do materialize it, you can't just say, "Oh, I've changed my mind now."
Well, I think that's why there's a course. I mean, it's like it takes you through all of this. Part of it's beginning to realize you are responsible for your thoughts. Your thoughts are what create it. So you start harnessing those and get them under, where you're paying attention to them. That usually makes you more responsible for what you start creating.
So. Absolutely.
But I tell people it's like having a baby. You can't decide, "Oh, I don't want it, and I'm going to send it back." Let's be careful what you ask for.
So in the conference, are you going to give more? What am I trying to say? Some
pointers, or
things of actually. That's one of the things I was impressed with. Is like, because so much of the time, metaphysics, we're all in this woo-woo state, and there's nothing real practical to apply to things. Well, that's how I saw you. Was you have something practical to give people?
Instructions, you mean, or guidelines?
That is a very good point, and I do know what I will simply call, New Age people who actually think of themselves as teachers, and they don't really believe that we as a human race need to do anything, that we can just sit back and watch what is happening without lifting a finger because it's all automatic pilot and it will just happen. And I argue with them that's not the way things work, because humanity must be a link between the higher spiritual and Mother Nature. And it's this whole thing of transference of energy, if nothing else. But people have to know what they're doing, and people do have to build this new civilization. We have to be, at least the more advanced souls on this planet have to be very involved in what is going on. They cannot just say, we don't need to be there. I have people who said, the fifth kingdom of the masters, they'll do it all. No, they won't. They can't. There are universal laws that forbid them from doing too much for us. There are higher spiritual beings who make a plan that says the masters can't do this all. They can guide, but they cannot do the work. It is humanity that must do the work. So I'm very much at odds with a lot of New Age groups that think nothing needs to be worked on by humans. We just sit and watch it happen. I don't believe that's the way it works.
Well, see, we do have free will, and that's why they can't interfere with the free will. But when people are talking about creating their reality and creating what they want, you can't just say, this is what I want, and then just sit on the couch. You've got to have action also to make it become a reality.
Absolutely.
It's not just going to appear because you want it.
Right, and then as far as like what you're saying, I totally agree. As far as like all of these things happening, I mean, I feel like what I saw here was we all took our positions when we came in, and now, and as everybody's still moving around, we're all taking our positions for these different parts that we're playing. And there are the masters. We're the ones that are on this level. We chose this one because this is the action level. This is the one to do the work. And then we have the guidance, and we have everything we need from the fifth. Like I said, all these other dimensions are here to help us, but we are the ones that have to do the work.
It's not going to be handed to us, because then it wouldn't be a lesson. It wouldn't serve a purpose.
Exactly.
That's right. There would be nothing to gain.
Somebody else would be work,
Yeah, this is the way we create our spirituality and expand our consciousness, is by doing it ourselves. Otherwise, there's no purpose in having an incarnation.
Well, exactly. What's the point? Okay.
Yeah. And what would be the fun out of it if it's just handed to you? A lot of times you have to work for something to really appreciate it, and have the benefit of it. It just handed to you. That's the way a lot of people are. Things are handed to them, and then they don't really appreciate it.
Right. So I look forward to our getting together down in Arkansas. I think this is going to be very interesting. And to meet new people, a new audience, is always a great honor. I like to get out, and this is why some years ago I was invited to speak at the National Platform Society in Washington, D.C. This is something that was created by Daniel Webster a long time ago, and it's very much today a political organization. And I kept phoning the headquarters in Washington saying, "Are you sure you have the right Wayne Peterson? Because do you know what I actually talk about? Because I know your program is all political." And they said, "Yes, we know it. You know who you are, and yes, we want you to speak, and yes, you're the only person that gets twice as much time as everybody else." So I was really getting worried. How do I approach these? There are people who go to that event that I only see on television because of their political connections. I said, well, how am I going to start to put this together? So what really bothered me was that the moment it was time for me to speak, the C-SPAN people came in to film it. And I thought, this could be good or this could be very bad. But I did the talk, and a reporter from the Washington Post was there, and they actually did a very good article. But it was nice to be, for a time, away from anybody who you might call interested in the New Age. I was now speaking to an audience with people from the Pentagon and, the politics of Washington. It was a totally different audience. But it went pretty well considering this new audience. But that was probably the most removed from the sort of New Age groups that I'd ever spoken to.
Well, did you see all these different? Because you're seeing a different cross section. So in these different groups, are you seeing similar things? Like, are they aware that changes are taking place? And
that's a good question, because I always tell people that the Americans seem to be the least connected. That when I have spoken to people in Europe, the audience are larger, really larger, and they know something about this topic, and I can tell from the questions they ask. And the types of people that show up are very different. I remember in Vienna, and they had the first 2 rows set aside in this auditorium for the diplomatic corps, and they're all filled. And the vice chancellor of Austria was in the audience. Later I saw him talking to Maitreya. But they seem to understand that the world is changing. They see the dangers. They see the collapse of the old, and they're frightened because they're not quite sure what's coming, because nobody knows what's coming because we haven't built it yet. But they know the current system, they know the current political, economic, and even religious systems don't look like they're going to survive. So they're out there saying, what is happening? Well, in the United States, everybody is very content. They don't see the dangers. We're such a big country, and such a country so powerful politically and in every other way that they just feel that nothing can happen. I think when the euro finally collapses, this will change. The European Union is coming apart, and that's a good thing. It's not doing what it needs to do, and something new has to be created there as well. And so the Europeans are sensitive, the Japanese are sensitive. Ben Krem always told me the largest audiences he ever has are in the Far East, mainly Japan and Taiwan. They understand this, but Americans do not. And
well, see, I returned a few months ago from China, the first time I spoke in Shanghai on the mainland, and the people, they came from all over China for the lecture in my class, and they got it, and they were very excited about these things. So I know people all over the world are they're into this, and they're really understanding it.
Right. We're going to have
we're going to have to. We're watching the clock here because he'll turn us off. But I'm seeing this. I'm also seeing the younger generation is really interested, and they're getting it too. Okay, but Wayne, before we have to sign off, if people want to contact you, how do you want them to do it?
That's a good question.
Right.
Website or whatever.
Well, I do have one email address that I think I could use, and it is my initials, WSP, NEV, abbreviation for Nevada. So it's WSPNEV at gmail.com. And that is one of the sites I sort of try to keep open for others to reach me.
Okay, but Wayne will be speaking at our conference just in a few weeks.
Yep.
And here, the 7th Transformation Conference in Rogers, Arkansas, July 13th to the 15th. Anybody who wants more information, check in on our website.
Right.
You can just type in DoloresCannon.com, and you'll have all the schedules and all the information. But Wayne is going to be there to give a lot more information than he just now gave. So it's going to be time for us to go. But Wayne, thanks for coming on tonight.
Oh, thank you, Dolores.
And we're going to see you in a few weeks. And thanks, everyone, for listening tonight. Good night.
Good night. Make it great.
If you enjoyed the show, check out more of our other videos and be sure to subscribe and click the like button. Thank you for listening to the Metaphysical Hour with Dolores Cannon.